All right, so this is going to be a bit of an impromptu discussion. So recently I saw a Twitter post from Geekdom 101. He's a YouTuber on Twitter, and he essentially put out the claim that the PS2 generation of games for Dragon Ball was the best era for Dragon Ball gaming, which as a mid-90s kid who grew up with the PS2, it's hard for me to disagree on that, but caused a lot of discussion within the fandom, a lot of good discussion on like what was the best era of gaming, and really came out between like the PS2 GameCube era and the PlayStation 4 Xbox One era, so this most recent era before the PlayStation 5. And it's a very interesting topic because, first you have to talk about, hey, what are qualifications for what the best generation is? In his explanation, like follow-up tweets, Geekdom 101 mentioned that, hey, my concept of the best generation of Dragon Ball gaming is the number of quality titles that was released out of that generation. And for the PS2, you have a lot of good games coming out. You had the Dragon Ball Z Budokai series, so you had Budokai 1, 2, and 3, along with Infinite World, which is kind of a celebration of the series, and people kind of like go back and forth between if Budokai 3 or if Infinite World are the best in the series. Then you have the Sparking, or what is known in the North American regions as Budokai Tenkaichi series, which you have Budokai 1, 2, and 3. Each of those are solid game titles, with 3 being probably like the most beloved title in that series and just across the Dragon Ball gaming fandom overall. And then you have Super Dragon Ball Z, which is a title that I don't think people talk a lot about anymore. It was fairly popular when I was a kid, but it's kind of like, I think most people bring it up just because it has like a nice art style, but it's a genuinely like very solid arcade fighting game. Now, at the same time, you do have, the stinker that is Dragon Ball Z Sagas, but otherwise, you have a solid collection within the PS2 generation. And then you have like the PlayStation 4 era. So in the PlayStation 4 era, you have Dragon Ball Xenoverse. It's kind of taking a lot of what made Sparking good and kind of throws it into a MMO style approach to it. It has a decent story behind it. I wouldn't say it has a decent story. It has a story compared to like the standard like going through the sagas thing in it. You also have Xenoverse 2, which basically replaces Xenoverse 1. And then you have Dragon Ball FighterZ, which FighterZ is a phenomenal fighting game. It's probably the best like technical fighting game of all the Dragon Ball Z fighting games that have come out. I'm sure there's like one or two people who come out of the woodworks to say, hey, Super Dragon Ball Z is the best, but I don't know if I would agree on that. And then you have the more recent Dragon Ball Z Kakarot, which is a action RPG style game where you're just going through the eras of Dragon Ball. Solid visuals, solid gameplay, a lot of heart to it. And so really the biggest argument for the PlayStation 4 generation of Dragon Ball games is just, I would say, the variety of experiences that you're afforded. If you're really looking for that like arena, high flying around type of format, you have that with the Xenoverse games. I wouldn't say the Xenoverse games really, the fighting mechanics in them really stand up to like the Budokai and Budokai Tenkaichi series, which even those games are like a step down technique wise from like the hardcore fighting games like Tekken, Street Fighter, all that kind of thing. So it's really, the RPG aspects actually of Xenoverse, I would say, are like what people like about it. People like to go in and create their characters, high flying battles, and just going through the story and like the little online like functionality of it. Then you have FighterZ, which that is your like straight fighting game. If you want to go to Evo, you're not probably bringing Budokai. You're fighting in a tournament for FighterZ, and this game has gotten like so much love. It has like such good graphics, totally separate from Xenoverse. I never felt like, hey, if I've played Xenoverse, I can't go back to FighterZ. Then there's Dragon Ball Z Kakarot. This game is interesting because I always felt like it took a lot of the concepts like gameplay concepts around Xenoverse and just melded it into kind of what it is now, like single player story experience. But that doesn't mean that I don't applaud it for providing a unique experience in that game. And so together with all three of those major games, and if I'm forgetting like a game, that means that it probably was not super noticeable. But I feel like that there's a solid argument for the PlayStation 2, which had like game after game. It was keeping Dragon Ball fans fed. And then for the PlayStation 4 era, where you just have like separate games for separate niches, which is cool. And each of those games received, I would say, as much love and attention as like these games were being updated at the same rate that these PS2 games were coming out. People complain about Xenoverse still getting DLC up until like just recently, but that's pretty amazing. So it's hard to argue for the fact that, hey, they weren't releasing game after game. In that sense, even though I grew up with the PlayStation 2 era of gaming, I would probably pick the PlayStation 4 as the best era of gaming. But I know there's people who just want to have like a new Dragon Ball Z package, new UI, new stuff every year. And I can't blame them for that. That makes you feel like, hey, we're getting a lot of good stuff. But the sheer variety is what makes me think the PlayStation 4 era is where it's at. But I did think about it, and I also got to give a shout out to the Nintendo DS era of gaming, because on the Nintendo DS you had Supersonic Warriors 2, you had Dragon Ball Origin series, you had Ultimate Butoden, and then you had Attack of the Saiyans, like the RPG. You even had like, I wouldn't consider this the best game, but you had that Dragon Ball Z card game on it. There was a lot of good games that were coming out on the DS that I think just kind of got unfairly disqualified just because they're DS games. But I think there is an argument to be said that runner-up would be the DS era. Other generations, like the PSP, I mean, you had Shin Budokai, which was just like a portable version of the Budokai series. You had Tag Team Tenkaichi, but it wasn't like breaking the mold in any way, so I wouldn't give it to that. On the 3DS, you had Extreme Butoden, and then you had what was that? Oh, you had Dragon Ball Fusions, which Dragon Ball Fusions, I have to give it credit for just being like an original concept, but it didn't have like a super amount of games. It had like the Dragon Ball Heroes games in Japan, but we didn't get those, so I don't count those. And then on GBA, you had some... On the GBA, you had some good games. You had Dragon Ball Advance Adventure, and you had The Legacy of Goku 2 and Boost Fury. But then you had some like all-time stinkers. You had Taiketsu, you had like the Dragon Ball official card game, and then you had like some mid games like Dragon Ball GT Transformation. So overall, my ranking will probably be like PlayStation 4, PlayStation 2, and then Nintendo DS, and then everything else. That's my ranking. Anyway, it was just an interesting like topic to talk about, so I hope you appreciated my rambling for this week. Subscribe if you feel like listening to any other my gaming videos. I'll try to put more out. Maybe try and put more out of these like just discussion styles instead of like me talking off a script. But otherwise, thank you for watching. Bye. Alright, so I recorded this video back around June of this year, a while before Sparking Zero released, and before I started changing around some of the format for this channel. I never released this video in part because I knew certain other videos would favor the YouTube algorithm better, and I was still trying to build my channel's base at the time. So I decided to save this video for a time when I didn't have enough time to finish a video for the week, or when a video I put out did abysmal, and it looks like we hit that point. Rather than just put the video up as is, I wanted to take the time to address some areas I missed from when I originally recorded this video, specifically some of the generations I skipped over. A big missing gap is pretty much every generation prior to the 6th generation of consoles, so like the pre-PS2 GameCube eras. And honestly, I don't feel like these games would even be in the running for best generation. I appreciate that these are where the game started, but I also don't think they hold up to the test of time versus the more modern games. I would much rather play Budokai 3, Fighters, or even something like Boo's Fury over 99% of games that were released prior. We also didn't get a lot of these games in North America unless you were messing with emulators, so in terms of generations, I can't really count them. Now, what about the PlayStation 3, Xbox 360 generation? Well, this was another mid-generation in my opinion. Either these games were just building off of the Budokai or Budokai Tenkaichi games to middling success, as was the case with the Burst Limit and Raging Blast games, or just downright bad games like Battle of Z and Dragon Ball Connect. Xenoverse technically released on these systems, but it was released day one cross-generation with the next-gen PS4 and Xbox One consoles, so I grouped them with that generation. Then there's the PlayStation 5 generation, and Sparking Zero is an amazing game. I am willing to firmly say better than Budokai Tenkaichi 3 from what I've played of it so far, but Sparking Zero and maybe The Breakers are the only games I would firmly place in the PlayStation 5 generation. And despite releasing in 2022, I don't think The Breakers even got a PS5 related box. It was clearly made just for PS4 first and just taking advantage of backwards compatibility. There's this meme of the PS5 just not having games, and I think that's really showcased here in full force. That's all to say my rankings didn't change that much between when I first recorded this video and now. Maybe the PS5 generation will go on to get more killer titles, but for now the PS4 is still my number one. Anyway, thanks for watching this video, and I'd love to talk more about other topics like this in the future if y'all have any recommendations. Other than that, bye again.